We are recording now, and I will now click broadcast. So I can give you a sign like 3, 2, 1, and then we start, okay?
Okay.
Ready?
Yo.
Okay, Sandrine, good? Okay, so let's go. 3, 2, 1, broadcast. Good afternoon and welcome everyone once again. Thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar on minimizing bribery and corruption in the time of COVID-19, organized by the International Anti-Corruption Academy. We are very happy to host you today again, and together with our esteemed speakers who will, among other things, discuss on how do nations facing the coronavirus pandemic are also facing other risks that are endangering the rule of law, public procurement procedures, transparency, the overall functioning of monitoring bodies and media, freedom, and in general democratic society. My name is Petra Sušac and I'm responsible for the general management at the Academy and will facilitate today's discussion. Please note that this webinar is recorded and will be made available next week on IACA webpage. We will welcome your questions during the session, which you can address using the chat window. Our speakers will try to answer as many questions as possible during the session, but for those of you who stay with us until the end, we will have an official Q&A session where we will provide you with an opportunity to ask your questions directly to the panel connecting live to this webinar session. Before we start with the webinar session, I would like you to allow me to shortly introduce to you the organizer of today's webinar, the International Anti-Corruption Academy. This is an intergovernmental organization and a post-secondary educational institution based in Luxembourg. And it was established on 8th of March 2011, and to date, the Academy has a constituency of 79 parties, including 75 member states and 4 intergovernmental organizations. As of August 2020, the IACA will consist of, in total, 80 parties. IACA aims to deliver anti-corruption education and training for professionals and practitioners from all sectors while forging partnerships to develop anti-corruption initiatives, provide technical assistance, and a platform for exchange and dialogue. The Academy offers 2 master's degree programs in anti-corruption, compliance, and collective action, Master in Anti-Corruption Studies, the MAX program, and International Master in Anti-Corruption Compliance and Collective Action program. Both of them are interdisciplinary courses and focus on both theory and practice in the fields of law, economics, political science, sociology, and behavioral science. Our applications for the 2 programs, which are offered for 2020-2022 academic years, are available online at IACA's webpage and will be delivered in a fully online format. IACA also offers the Summer Academy program and regional summer academies, which provide training for professionals in anti-corruption and related fields. Multiple tailor-made trainings are also organized throughout the year, and you can request more information contacting us, visiting our webpage, as Academy is also offering now online versions of the tailor-made trainings. The International Summer Academy this year will be also offered in a fully online format and will be implemented in September, in particular from 5th to 11th September this year. Now I would continue with our panel discussion by introducing to you today's speakers. First of all, please allow me to introduce to you our moderator for today, Mr. Drago Kos, who is currently the chair of the OECD Working Group on Bribery in International Business Transactions, co-chair of MENA, OECD Business Integrity Network, and a member of IACA Frequent Visiting Faculty. He's a former member of International Anti-Corruption Advisory Board and of the Defense Corruption Monitoring Committee in Ukraine, and advisor to the Kosovo Anti-Corruption Agency. Between 2011 and 2015, he used to be International Commissioner and Chair of the Joint Independent Anti-Corruption Monitoring and Evaluation Committee in Afghanistan. And between 2003 and 2011, he was the Chairman of the Council of Europe's Group of States Against Corruption. Drago, thank you very much for joining us today and also for accepting the role of moderator. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It will be a pleasure today to moderate the session.
Thank you. We continue with our next speaker, Ms. Sandrine Richard, who is a lawyer at the Paris Bar and a graduate student at the Université Paris II, Panthéon-Assas. After practicing with Olivia Schnerb in financial criminal law, she set up her own law firm in financial and business criminal law and later specialized in the prevention and fight against corruption. In this way, she works as a consultant for companies and regularly conducts compliance diagnostics and strategic consulting missions for them. Provides trainings on the implementation of the SAPIN 2 law for listed companies and their foreign subsidiaries. She is also an expert and consultant to few international organizations such as OECD, DCAF, and UNDP. She organizes and participates in important international conferences related to the fight against corruption and collaborates with the French Anti-Corruption Agency. Ms. Sandrine Richard is an expert and auditor in intelligence economic and at the National Institute of High Studies of Security and Justice, attached to the Cabinet of the Prime Minister. Sandrine, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much and welcome. And we continue with our next speaker, Mr. James Wasserstrom. He became an anti-corruption practitioner through his work directing the Office of Oversight and Publicly Owned Enterprises within the United Nations Administration Mission in Kosovo. He established and led OPO-OE for 4 years, identifying massive fraud and abuse of authority in Kosovo's public utilities, the largest component of the then breakaway province GDP. He attacked corruption and political interference directly and eventually led transformation of the utilities into more modern corporate structures with professional governance and ultimately, in some cases, privatization. Based in Greece, Mr. Wasserstrom leads his own consulting operations, the Wasserstrom Group, which inter alia focuses on countering corruption, terrorist financing, money laundering, and narcotics. With his experience in Eastern Europe, the Balkans, and Afghanistan, his current work involves not just public and private sector corruption, but now state-sponsored corruption as a tool of foreign policy. Jim, it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome once again. We will continue immediately with the panel discussion. I see that Sandrine has some technical problems. She will join us any moment, but I would now give the floor to Mr. Drago Kos, who will continue with the webinar discussion. Drago, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Well, good afternoon if you're in our time zone, and thank you already for finding the time to join us in this, let's say, high summer season. When the pandemic started last year, we saw different responses from different countries. Some of the political leaders, even some of the experts, heavily underestimated the events, and their reactions were pretty much wrong at the beginning. With rare exceptions, today we see that those reactions are more or less proper, that everybody understands how to fight the pandemic. And of course, in doing this in the healthcare sector, new dilemmas have emerged. What is interesting is that we were in the 21st century, and we're still fighting the pandemic with the measures which are thousands of years old, social distancing and quarantines. Let us all hope that we will get the vaccine or the medication soon. Otherwise, this will really change, our world will change into something which we could never foresee some years ago. Some of the politicians, such as French President Macron, they talk about war against the virus. So are we really at war? We have to say that, let's say, some of the elements of the pandemic, let's say the number of casualties, the size and scope of natural resources needed to combat the enemy, makes this war metaphor quite a normal one. But there are also other less obvious markers of a wartime mentality. The lowering or suspension of existing democratic, legal, and ethical standards. Some basic functions of government essential in peacetime are downplayed or set aside. which means that things which are usually quite normal in normal times, such as, let's say, upholding democracy, sticking to the rule of law, in identifying, investigating, and prosecuting criminals, in the time of pandemic was badly affected. Sometimes from objective, sometimes from subjective reasons. And since, let's say, half of a year or even more, several months of the pandemic are behind us, we could also see that there are some individuals which deliberately try to misuse the circumstances for either gaining the political power or for enriching themselves. Some say that in the time of pandemic, no, there's no time or chance to fight corruption. And if we all learn today from our webinar today that this is absolutely wrong, that in the times we are facing today, we have to fight corruption even more, then we will achieve our goal for today. So it's not that in the time of pandemic we'll give up on fighting corruption. We have to step up the pressure. Of course, this is easy to say, difficult to achieve. Some of the country leaders still nowadays are fighting a very difficult dilemma. What to do, what to protect first, human lives or national economies. And in whatever they do, a lot of public resources are being spent, and we don't talk about, we talk about millions, billions, and trillions of euros or dollars. And when so much money is available at once, let's say the opportunities for misuses, for the waste, and for the abuse grow significantly. And that's why we really have to stay focused, and we really have to do something that that money will not get lost. How we will do it today? We first, Sandrine will explain or give us information on the special conditions in the time of pandemic. And then we try to analyze several areas which are potentially badly hit by corruption in the time of pandemic. The rule of law, public procurement, transparency, functioning of monitoring bodies, and media freedom. We added a chapter on cybersecurity because almost the whole world turned into cyber operations due to social distancing and since to lockdowns. And since let's say the quantity of the cyber operations grew immensely, that also meant that the possibilities for their misuse have grown significantly. So let it be enough for the introduction, and I pass the floor now to Sandrine to tell us how the circumstances look like in the time of pandemic.
Sandrine, are you here with us? I believe we will have to continue with Jim until Sandrine connects again. Drago, do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. So I would suggest that Jim goes on with his part because Sandrine is obviously not here.
She will join us any moment, and then we will go back to the part on the special conditions in the time of pandemic, if you agree.
Jim, can you hear us?
Jim, it's your turn. Just a second.
Now we can't hear Jim, so.
Jim, we cannot hear you, sorry. Doesn't work.
What we can do is, meanwhile, while Jim is trying to fix his mic and Sandrine is trying to come back, I can present, so my next part, which was the changes in the public procurement, and hopefully Jean will be able to join us with his mic and Sandrine will be able to connect again. So,
let's do this way, Drago.
Okay, so the first problem which emerged when pandemic hit with all the force was an absolute lack of medical and personal protective equipment. And countries started to buy mainly masks, ventilators, and so on. And there was absolutely not enough products on the market to fulfill all the needs. And there was an additional problem, which was that public procurement rules are normally very heavy with the aim to prevent the waste and abuse of public resources. But even in normal times, there are no ideal and absolutely airtight solutions. So it was, of course, the question how the two magic words, which were easier and faster, will function in the current circumstances. In many national laws, the provisions have been made already for emergency procurement, which the COVID-19 crisis clearly demands. So, for example, China has had a very good law which was enabling the country to use the emergency procurement procedures. France did it almost immediately. UK also, but when mentioning the UK, it has to be mentioned something else too. Now, in the UK public procurement policy note, the UK government did not only try to, let's say, make the public procurement rules easier and faster, they add additional goal, which was protection of the jobs in the future. So that was an extremely interesting combination of the public procurement policy note. So, what are the main characteristics of the public procurement in the time of pandemic? First, deadlines may and have to be shortened significantly. There is not so much request for the competitive tendering because the requirements for minimum number of candidates may be abolished, just with the desire to really procure and purchase the technical equipment as soon as possible. Contracts were allowed to be awarded directly. And what was also important is that the quick satisfaction of the needs of hospitals and other healthcare institutions was allowed to be considered an urgency, which of course meant that those urgent procedures could be applied. And if nothing else worked, the contracting authorities were in position, had the right to contact potential contractors directly. Those characteristics are taken from the European Union communication on how to use the public procurement framework in the emergency situation. I'm sure you all know that, let's say, the European Union has a very strict EU directive on public procurement, which, if applied in a normal way, would cause thousands of deaths, because countries would simply not be able to procure the equipment needed. So the EU issued the guidance, and that for many months it was the only thing which the EU did. Only after a few months the EU started to wake up, and now it is really delivering good results. So, on one hand, we are having easier and faster public procurement procedures involving a lot of resources, and of course this has meant that the risks for corruption have increased significantly. So what to do to, if not, let's say, decrease the risks to the minimum, how to counterbalance those increased risks? So there have to be additional safeguards for emergency procurement procedures. If we have emergency procedures in the area of public procurement, we should also have emergency procedures in the area of fighting corruption in those procedures, such as, let's say, additional regular timely public reporting of procurement authorities on their activities in short intervals. Now, we cannot allow ourselves that now the procurement authorities will issue reports every year, because in every year many things can happen and the bulk of the money might get lost already. Then we have to have real-time external monitoring by existing or new oversight bodies. In some countries, they already have, let's say, external public procurement monitoring bodies, which can engage normally after public procurement contracts have been signed. But this is an exception situation, so we have to allow them that they could do the real-time monitoring, which means following all the steps of the concrete public procurement procedures, even before the contracts are being signed and let's say the equipment has been delivered. If there are suspicions of fraud or waste or abuse, there has to be swift investigation of those suspicions. And many countries did so. Many countries did so alone, many countries did so in cooperation with other countries, with Europol, Interpol, and so on. So we should not wait that everything is over. We should start doing the investigations right away if we have reasons to believe that something went wrong. And if those suspicions are being proven, then the sanctions have to be applied quickly. They can be either disciplinary sanctions, of course, and those are normally the fastest ones, financial ones too, but also normal civil and criminal sanctions, because if criminal offenses are being committed, things have to be investigated, prosecuted, and sentenced. Of course, this always takes a bit more time than disciplinary political sanctions, but without applying sanctions against those misusing the current situation, the governments will start losing, and they are losing the trust of their citizens. And in addition to the problems related to pandemic, they will soon start to gain some other problems. And if they are smart, they will do everything possible in their power, let's say, to either prevent the waste, abuse, and fraud, or to investigate it and sanction it. So let us see if our guys are back.
I'm back, if you can hear me.
Okay, we can hear you, Jim. So you can start now with the rule of law part.
All right, great. Well, I'm sorry for the problem before, everyone. So as you can see from the slide on COVID and the rule of law, it's obvious that under circumstances like these, there'll be higher priorities for law enforcement than white-collar crime or corruption. They're going to be diverted to public safety and security. But and there's enormous pressure for this diversion, because people are going to say, people are dying, why are you focusing on this? Well, the point that we're making in this particular slide is that this is not the time to be diverting all your resources away from corruption, because in fact, corruption with waste, fraud, and abuse of resources in this crisis is not victimless. These resources, which are scarce, should be devoted to the public health crisis. And the reports that one reads over and over and over again, to which Drago has referred, such as in procurement, and bribery for services which are supposed to be provided for free. Corruption and fraud reports have increased dramatically as the enormous amounts of funds are entering the economy supposedly for public health purposes, but in fact are going into the pockets of corrupt individuals. So those resources are not reaching the individuals concerned, and the law enforcement and those who are responsible for adhering to the rule of law should be maintaining some clear and strict engagement and they should not be abandoning the fight against corruption. As in the last point, we know this is difficult, and we know that there are pressures and legitimate ones, but this is not victimless white-collar crime. This actually creates more victims of public health catastrophe. And therefore, the suggestion here is that resources that are not normally used necessarily for the fight against corruption should be marshaled to establish interagency task forces and to stay on top of the fight against corruption, particularly in a time of crisis like this one. Back to you, Drago.
Thank you, Jim. I just wanted to add that Sandrine will join us any moment. She had issues with her internet connection. Unfortunately, these are the challenges of doing the online webinars and trainings, but we will welcome her back once she is here. I will give you a sign. Drago, I'm giving back floor to you now.
Thank you, Petra. If you wish, I can cover Sandrine's part on the special conditions in the time of pandemic.
Of course, please.
Yeah, okay, so the pandemic, of course, we never had a pandemic like this one in the years before, but we had pandemics already. So on the basis of the previous pandemics, we can see that there's not so much difference between the previous one and the current one, with the exception, of course, that the current one is the biggest one, and everything what happened, let's say, during the, let's say, West African Ebola outbreak, and so on, also applies here, but to much larger extent. So what happened in previous pandemics was the following. Emergency procedures were applied for the purchase of medical and personal protective equipment, and which means that normal procurement procedures were widely disregarded. This is also happening right now. We can, let's say, if you would go through the list of countries which were purchasing the personal protective equipment and medical equipment, you would see that there are many countries, they have real problems with serious suspicions of corruption during the purchase. You say, I can mention, unfortunately, my own country, Slovenia, where the National Bureau of Investigation started a huge investigation of potential corruption, even arresting one of the ministers for a day. And they conducted also the house search in his home. What is also happening is the pilfering of available supplies. The price go up. We could see that the price of the medical equipment varied significantly from one month to another, sometimes even from the beginning of the month until the end of the month, because there was so much demand for this equipment that basically the producer could sell anything to everybody at any price. And this, of course, had some serious consequences. Another thing followed on this one, it was the substandard and fake medical equipment or pharmaceutical products entering the market. Their quantity raised significantly because people needed the equipment. People were willing to buy anything just to protect themselves. So we saw people wearing completely, let's say, useless masks, covering their faces, and paying really high prices for them. Then there were problems in the healthcare workforce, recruitment and management. You would normally expect that in situations like that, that what will happen, we will have on the political side, we would have strong central and local leadership, and which will be backed by a healthcare workforce with real expertise. But since the need for the workforce in such situation increases significantly, especially in the time of Ebola outbreak, we could see that employment, recruitment, and promotion of individuals which have basically no knowledge about healthcare, they still got jobs and they were still treating the patients. Then what we witness normally is petty corruption at the service delivery level. Not only that some, let's say, that healthcare staff is asking for bribes or let's say for any sort of services, then they can ask for, let's say, special money to skip the waiting lines, or to, let's say, to treat preferentially representatives of special, let's say, classes and so on. What we also see is, in some cases, that people are paying bribes to, let's say, police officers and healthcare workers just to escape quarantines, not to be, let's say, restrained for 2 or more weeks. What is happening right now is the opacity in the research and development of vaccines, medicines. Without any doubt, the company which will be the first one producing the working or functioning vaccine or medicine will get extremely rich. And we all know that already in normal time, there's the competition among pharmaceutical companies is not always let's say, the most polite and the most gentle one. What is happening now is that the profiteering, manipulation of industry and market dynamics, supply and distribution chains are becoming almost normal. So what is good is that, let's say, the whole world is watching now. The whole world is watching when we will get the new vaccine and when we will get the new medicine. And maybe because of that publicity and transparency, let's say the potential for misuses in the production and let's say sale of the medicine and vaccine will not be so big as it would normally be. And last but not least, and we said this already, you know, most governments are, not most, all governments are mainly more developing and devoting their resources to protect their citizens' lives, which is normal. Which is not so normal is that in doing so, they disregard the need for necessary monitoring of all other risks which were mentioned before. So even with knowing everything, knowing all the risks which can happen, we can still see governments which are basically, they don't care about how to prevent or to investigate, how to prevent the risks and investigate the suspicions. I hope the Sandrine is back with us now. If not, Jim, I will give the floor back to you for your next topic, which is the functioning of monitoring bodies.
Right, and I think for those of you who have the slide in front of you, I call oversight and monitoring the antibodies to the coronavirus problem. I mean, from the first point, you can see the pandemic has created a perfect storm for corruption. And as we've been pointing out over and over again, this cuts across countries across the globe. It's not limited to a specific pool. We see over and over again examples of distraction from normal oversight and monitoring because of the urgency of the problem. This is understandable, but with the resources that have been devoted to this problem, the degree of oversight and monitoring needs to increase, not decrease. Also for the purposes that we mentioned before, that people's lives are at stake. But we've seen national parliaments who've been bypassed by the executive branch or have agreed to reduce over expenditure, allocation of funds. This oversight should be undertaken with more urgency and as Drago has mentioned, not long post facto, but as close to real time as possible. By the time these transgressions have been discovered, it's long past, the evidence may disappear, and the individuals may have whitewashed. It's important to do oversight as close to real time as possible. This includes things which are regular, like audits and investigations. Again, these often take place post facto. That's understandable. But there are often provisions, especially when circumstances are not normal, as they are now, where extraordinary audits or investigations can take place, and done with haste and as close to real time as possible. These are more important under these circumstances, not less important. This is not the time to be looking away from where we're going, but looking very closely at where we're headed. Anti-corruption agencies, where they exist, this is clearly an area of priority. Again, massive amounts of money, relaxed oversight, relaxed controls and regulations. This is a recipe for mishandling of the response and mishandling of funds. And the amount of money justifies close oversight. It doesn't justify lax oversight. Banks and other financial institutions, admittedly working under difficult circumstances, should be on the watch for more and more kinds of suspicious transactions. Again, they should not be more tolerant. They should be as tolerant, or even or more intolerant of suspicious transactions. Civil society, very often, because there's a rush to respond. Civil society is often sidelined in discussions with government. It's not these activists, whether they're in anti-corruption or in public health or both. This is the time to be brought in to the discussion officially and with real roles. Time for more transparency and accountability, not less. And of course, now, as always, is the time for protection of whistleblowers. This is a problem, of course, since most countries don't have a proper legislation to protect whistleblowers, if they have legislation at all. And even in the event, as a whistleblower myself, even in the event that one blows the whistle, those mechanisms often fail, as I hear over and over again from whistleblowers who reach out to me. And whistleblowing is an essential part of transparency and accountability, and they should not be marginalized. They should not be brushed aside. They should not be discredited. Their story should be looked at first and foremost, and not dismissed for reasons of expedience or urgency, because they very often take real risks in bringing the truth to light. So oversight and monitoring are essential to the avoidance of fraud, waste, and abuse, and the efficient and effective use of resources in this crisis.
Petra, since Sandrine is not with us yet, should I continue with her next part?
Let's continue. She was here 2 minutes ago, but unfortunately, she had some technical issues, and I know she's trying to connect. So, but let's continue. She can still join us for the discussion once she's here.
Okay, and then I would suggest, Jim, that after me you cover your cyber criminality part, and then I will cover the rest until the end if Sandrine does not join us. Okay,
sounds like a good plan.
So on transparency, you see, transparency, some people think that transparency is a silver bullet against corruption. It is not. You know, we cannot fight or you cannot destroy corruption by transparency only. But it is extremely important tool making the life of the corrupt individuals very difficult, because they have to constantly look for new ways of doing criminality, because the transparency is basically really making their lives quite difficult. Of course, we see, let's say, Scandinavian countries with extremely high level of transparency, and as you all know, Scandinavian countries are also countries with the very low level of corruption. So there is a link, but still, transparency only will not kill corruption. What is important is that transparency is really of crucial nature now in the time which we live now, for two reasons. The first one is people are afraid. No, the humanity is basically, the whole humanity is facing such an enemy for the first time. So people do not know, they're afraid for their lives, they're afraid for their health, and the health of their kids, families, and so on. So governments can do a lot if they're transparent in their efforts against COVID-19. Let's say, to explain to people how the medical facilities are being organized, how social distancing should be introduced and enforced. How are we distancing ourselves? Smart governments report to the citizens where do they stand with the purchase and delivery and distribution of personal protective equipment. People have to know what are the medical conditions in the field. They have to know in what countries they do live, what countries it is dangerous to travel to, which countries not, and so on. And people have to know, they have the right to know what is the composition of the responsible governmental teams. So with all this information, people will start trusting their governments that they do what they have to do in the medical area. But of course, this can be easily destroyed if the second layer of transparency is being forgotten, which is transparency of public procurement. I spoke a bit about it already, but let's say, since governments were trying to buy the equipment very quick, at any price, this was opening door widely to losses and other serious problems. Let's say, deliberate selection of low quality equipment and supplies, possibly in excessive amounts, sometimes even overpriced, unsuited to local conditions, or even defective. Then contracts were steered to cronies, relations, friends, political allies, and so on. The medical equipment was distributed inequitably to different categories of citizens, and so on, so on. So if governments were smart, but not all of the governments were smart, they were trying to shed as much light as possible on those procedures. Let's say in Ukraine, everything what was bought to fight pandemic could be seen online. Contrary to that, we have countries where, let's say, conditions of the contracts, prices, the quantities are still secret nowadays. The problem is that when people see this happening, the suspicions will start to grow. There's no country where everything can be kept confidential all the time. And with the lapse of time, when people will not be so frightened anymore with the issue of the virus, they will ask more and more questions, and they will demand more and more responses. And if they will not get them, the suspicion will move to another area too. Not only it will not stay limited to the area of COVID-19 pandemic, but it might also undermine the general trust of the citizens into their governments. So it is not enough just to stay at the level of transparency which we had before the pandemic, because back then we had normal, regular public procurement procedures, and now we are applying the accelerated ones. We have to increase the level of transparency, if possible, of course. We have to apply unorthodox methods, maybe, let's say, even letting representatives of civil society to monitor what is going on in the public procurement area, because what is absolutely crucial is we have to facilitate the integrity of the procurement process. Our citizens have to understand, and they have to believe that what governments are doing is fair, honest, legal, and useful for them. And they will only do this, they will only trust their governments if they will get the answers to the questions they will ask. Not only on the medical side of the pandemic, but also on the, let's say, financial side of the pandemic. And Jim, I pass the floor back to you.
You need to unmute yourself, Jim.
Jim, you're muted.
Right. My apologies.
Yes.
I hate being muted, so this is giving me a great opportunity. So I'll be talking now a bit about cyber criminality, and to be clear, this is not something of which there's a lot of reporting. This is more in the area of somewhat theoretical, but it's based on those who are following cyber criminality and the whole issue of cybersecurity and cyber criminality as it has been affected by more online activity. Because of what we're learning in terms of cybersecurity, and some of this may be truisms, and we may know this, but we now have to think about it with respect to the COVID crisis. I'm sorry, I just unplugged myself here. In the sense that that hackers are now really not looking to steal your personal account information. Yes, they do that also, but they're really trying themselves to be brokers of data, brokers of information, and they are able. And as we know from cybersecurity experts, most hacks are completely undetected. We never know that they've happened. Very rarely, apparently, do these emerge into the public eye. So imagine the opportunity, the market opportunity this creates for cyber criminals in the area of fraud, waste, and abuse. So that's where I'm going with this. There are certainly reports of tampering with procurement-related data, tampering with bids, changing documents, changing titles to real estate, property. So there's blackmail and extortion of data that one thinks is confidential, and then add to that now the move towards cyber surveillance, where with facial recognition, with information on almost everything we do online. And one can anticipate that this will provide more opportunities for bribery, extortion, and corruption. And the individuals I've talked to who are not necessarily in the anti-corruption field but we're now beginning to look at this area much more carefully because we have read of hacks where tens of millions of dollars have been stolen from treasuries. This has happened. We know about it happening. Apparently, having happened in Bangladesh was mentioned. But there are other places which haven't gone public with the looting of their treasuries, from what I understand. I can't name them because it's not. I feel uncomfortable doing that. But my understanding is that that there are other official accounts which have been tampered with from abroad by cyber criminals, and this has gone largely unreported. And these are tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars. So what do we do about this? I am unaware of an organized effort that deals with this rise in cyber criminality. Yes, there are some very powerful national efforts, but cyber criminality is not a national problem. Cyber criminality is a problem without borders, and therefore it will require a new set of cooperation and international agreements, which are not even on the horizon as far as I know, that require the recruitment and training of specialists in this kind of cybercrime, not what we think of in terms of personal account information, identity theft. We're talking about theft of identity of a massive kind, not individuals, but of collectives, of treasuries, of private firms, and of public institutions. So the move to cyberspace by so many of us, for example, having these kinds of Zoom meetings, and we all know these are easily hacked. This is the false sense of security that one might have that no one is watching or listening or collecting. Even the apps on your phone, from what I understand, are actually watching one another, not just you, and collecting that data and using it for the purposes of which most of us are not aware. Certainly, I'm not aware of the extent to which this is being used on myself. So this, to me, is the brave new world of corruption, and I fear for it. And as COVID has forced us to make this move, I think we need to organize ourselves around a new threat. I'll turn it over to Drago or Sandrine.
Well, is Sandrine with us or not? I see her.
She's here.
I'm sorry, I'm here. I have just a big issue with electricity.
No problem, Sandrine. It can happen.
Thank you so much.
So Sandrine, it's your turn now to explain to us what happens with media freedom in the countries. Well, it looks that problems with electricity are really big ones, so I will try to cover this one too.
Sandrine, you are here?
Yes,
Okay.
sorry, can you hear me? I'm sorry, I have a really big difficult issue. It's all the city, so it's not just in my house. I'm very lucky. So
No problem.
just regarding the media, I don't know if you already talk about the media before. No, Drago.
No.
No.
This is for you now. You speak about media freedom now.
Sorry, everybody. So I think now the media play a very, very, very big role in this time, and I would like to try to explain that first of all, the media can inform and educate people about the effect of corruption and increase the political risk of those involved in corrupt practices. This is very important. Of course, regarding anti-corruption, the media offers a big key for information about governmental, administrative, and business activities, and thus providing the public with a critical capacity to hold those in power accountable. This is another point, it's very, very important. Of course, unfortunately, it's very dangerous to be a journalist because, as you know, fighting corruption in the media can involve a wide range of approaches. And unfortunately, a lot of journalists can be assailed and can be die for the corruption, to investigate the case of corruption. So media, it's the right to access to information. There are a lot of type of media. I don't have time to enter in the detail, but you need to just to focus on to answer to the question of one of them. I didn't remember the name of the participant, I'm sorry, but
his name is Rohit.
Yes, I tried because he asked, what can I do? And I think media, this is the only thing with civil society, they can help to fight against corruption. Like today, for example, you know, we are the media. Media is not just TV, you know. Media, it's like network also. So if the government doesn't want to change anything, okay, media can do this. And that's why I say that media can increase the political risk of those exposed for their corrupt practices and foster the critical awareness of civil society, and of course, also the international community. You know, in this time, and especially in COVID, the media play a very, very big role, like in France, for example, but not just like in France. I will talk about, for example, Lebanon, because if the media doesn't play this role, civil society cannot fight alone. You know, they fight against corruption. They try to send a message to the Europe and US to say, please listen to me, listen to them, because the government of Lebanon doesn't want to change anything, you know. And this is the role of the media. So I think, of course, you have to pay attention, because all the media are not, I don't want to say that, are not serious, but sometimes you can find fake, of course. So you have to pay attention. But this is the only key with the civil society to fight against corruption if the government doesn't want to say anything, doesn't want to do, sorry, anything, you know. So this is very important in this time, I think, I'm sure. So if you want to add something, Drago or James?
No, it's me. I think we should end with a short conclusion, just to give participants some time to ask questions. And I already saw there are many questions. Many questions have been asked already, and we will really have to work hard to reply to all of them. So, as of this morning, the human toll due to pandemic was 16,500,000 people, with 650 and 4,000 people dead. This is more than 3 times the number of people died during the use of nuclear arms in the World War II. So this is the extent of damage for human lives in the world today. 16.5 million cases of infections and almost 700,000 people killed. The question here is, whom we are just fighting this time? Just the nature, or the humanity has also added its part to the, let's say, to the development of the virus and its spread around the world? The problem is that the medical consequences of the pandemic, which we see today, are just one part of the consequences of the whole situation. They are happening right now. Of course, they are for sure they're the most painful ones, because we are losing our loved ones and so on. But in the times to come, we will see the consequences of growing corruption. We will see increased state capture of some countries. We will see some, but pandemic being the excuse for some democracies for becoming more illiberal. And as we see already, we will see some proto-authoritarian leaders becoming even more anti-democratic. So, and those are all the consequences which will follow. And let me just remind you, we did not even tackle the issue of economic assistance of current governments to their economies. They say, while in the US, they speak about trillions of dollars, in other countries speak about billions of dollars. European Union just made the decision to assist its countries with more than 1,000 billion euros. So those are all things which are happening today. And if corruption will not be fought, then I am afraid we will see very, let's say, worrying developments in the future. But what can we say today? First of all, transparency and accountability should not be lost in the haste to respond to COVID-19. The basic rules of functioning democracies, which also include the balance of powers, must remain intact and protected by all means. Why am I saying that? Because we saw countries where some, let's say, authoritarian leaders were simply abolishing the role of the legislative branch of power or the judicial branch of power, and they wanted to rule their countries by themselves. The rule of law should be ensured through increased level of activity of all monitoring institutions and agencies in all areas prone to abuse. Maximized flexibility of the rules on public procurement should be accompanied by enhanced supervisory mechanisms and levels of scrutiny. Existing rules and principles on transparency should not be diminished. Contrary to that, they should be upgraded. Activities of monitoring bodies in high-risk areas should be maintained or even additionally strengthened to ensure prevention and accountability for potential misuses. And last but not least, media should continue to function in conditions of maximum freedom. This does not apply only for the medical side of surviving, or let's say fighting pandemic, but also it should also apply to the financial, economic side of fighting pandemic, which will not, let's say, the fight against medical consequences of pandemic will maybe last, hopefully not more than half a year, maybe 1 year, because I'm pretty much sure that vaccine or medicine will be invented soon. So we will be done with the medical consequences, let's say approximately 1 year. Of course, those of us who have lost somebody, we will always remember that. But what will happen in the years to come will be that the consequences of corruption in economic measures of governments will be felt for many, many decades afterwards. And at the end, the basic question again, should COVID-19 pandemic be an excuse for not fighting corruption? And I really do hope that we all do understand now that the answer is no. On the contrary, pandemic should be a reason to fight corruption even more, because all of us will find ourselves really in a completely different world in the years to come. I would like to thank you in the name of all three of us for listening to our presentation. We of course do apologize for the problems which were out, we could not influence them. And I think the best thing now would be to start answering your questions. And I give the floor back to Petra now. And Petra, I'm sure you will know how to guide us with the questions.
Thank you, Drago. Thank you, Jim and Sandrine. We have now Stanislas Zuin with us live, and he had a question for the panel. He's already here ready to address his question. Stanislaus, do you hear me? Can you please join now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this webinar. I just had a quick question to James about the various source of information you would mention in your slide regarding the increased cases of fraud. Is it in specific countries or regions, and could you share possibly some reports with us? And then have you noticed any side effects of fraud in other areas than medical equipment only? Thank you.
Thank you, Stanislas, for the question. One of the main sources of information that I mean, first of all, I'm receiving reports from anti-corruption activists from a variety of countries who are reporting this. But there is one kind of central clearinghouse that I think I may have referred to in an email, which is the Anti-Corruption Advocacy Network, which is Washington-based and includes a broad cross-section of activists from the United States and around the world. And they're collecting data, cases, reports from individual countries, from their contacts. And this is a trove of information that where sources are emerging every day, and reports are emerging several times a week. So I would urge those who are interested to contact the moderator of that particular network, which I can provide to Petra, and then she can circulate that to others. I'm sure you would all be welcome to join in that network. And as far as areas outside of public health, I think we get to the question of the fungibility of money, and I was going to be talking about this in connection with the conclusion. there's the expression that the great oaks from little acorns grow, and great oligarchs from little kleptocrats grow. So as individuals misappropriate funds, whether through public health or from other areas, and we've heard of all of the misappropriation or the diversion of funds or the mishandling of funds in connection with PPE. But what we haven't heard as much of is the appointment of cronies to capture all other kinds of procurement while attention is being diverted in favor in the crisis. The diversion of resources, what I'm seeing and hearing, is not limited only to public health. With lax oversight and poor transparency and almost no accountability, this is happening in other sectors as well. It's not limited to public health. I'm sure my co-panelists can talk about that. So the door was opened by COVID, but for those who are already tempted or engaged in misappropriation, this just allows them to advance those aims even more so. So again, to just very quickly, ACAN has sources that come through several times a week, and this problem of lax oversight is not limited to public health. It is the excuse for even more lax oversight.
Thank you very much, Jim. Drago, do you want to add anything? If not, we can continue with next question, please. Okay, so next we have with us Ms. Boni Palivka. Boni, are you here? Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and we can also see you. Welcome.
Great, hi. So my question is for James. I'm in Mexico and we see organized crime groups taking advantage of the very lax security situation. So I'm especially interested in this area, but I know that's sort of off topic for you. So my question for you is, to what extent do the existing international laws and agreements on organized crime apply to cybersecurity?
Well, in some cases, I mean, to the extent the crime is organized in the way that it's defined in law, the laws would have to be amended in order to cover these particular kinds of abuses. But there's no obstacle to making those amendments. Where the obstacle is in defining the crime cross-border, because it's an amorphous kind of criminality. It's not very easily defined. There are obviously easy kinds of cyber criminality, the theft of private information for an illegal purpose is relatively easy to define. But when you're talking about the theft of metadata, massive amounts of data, which then are resold, which those who are stealing it, they've committed a crime of theft, but they aren't the ones who are actually. Then there's a multiplicity of crimes to which they are accessories. They're not primes. So this has not been well defined, not only in most countries, but across borders. So to the extent that one can prove it's organized, the definitions exist, but beyond that is I would say the dark web for all of us in law enforcement and out.
Thank you.
May I add something here? There's special it is Council of Europe Convention on Cybercriminality. It's called Cybercrime Convention, which is especially devoted to the problems of cybercriminality. The problem is it is a Council of Europe Convention. Why it's the problem? Because some people think that because it's Council of Europe Convention, other countries from other continents cannot accede to it. But this is not the case. So any other country from the world can accede to this convention. And I just checked the status of ratifications. I have to say that I didn't see many other countries joining the convention, with the exception, of course, European countries. And this is convention which is basically really, it was negotiated hard. For the time being, it's the only one in the world. And it is basically fitting very nice to the United Nations Convention on Transnational Organized Crime, UNTOC. So reading those two conventions together can give us many ideas on what to do. Of course, then the harder part comes next, how to convince our governments to do it.
And also, Bonnie, I mean, I'm sure you know, we all know, this is a highly technical area. And there's a paucity of expertise, even in rich countries, that will devote themselves to fighting cyber criminality. Frankly, this is not criminality, but there's quite a lot of opportunity for individuals to get involved in this field in a lawful way, which are also lucrative. So it will require a raising of technical expertise. It'll require the ability to attract people into law enforcement in this area when they may have other opportunities that may be more lucrative or attractive. But it is a black hole for potential corruption.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you very much. Then we have our next participant, Ms. Claudia Sannen. Claudia, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. First of all, good morning to everybody, and thank you for the interesting presentation. I actually have two questions that are a little bit related to one another. I work with Transparency International Brazil here in our business integrity program. And as Drago pointed out very briefly, in many countries, governments have implemented economic stimulus packages in huge numbers. And unfortunately, here in Brazil, it has been done predominantly without any transparency and any accountability. And my first question is that I would like to know what kind of effective anti-corruption measures should be integrated into this kind of responses, especially in countries like Brazil, where we do not have any lobby regulations in place. And also what kind of role you see that international financial organizations can play here, and especially international investors as well. So that would be the first part of my question. And the second one would be more looking into the responsibility you see for the private sector to prevent and counter corruption in this pandemic. And if you have any examples for us of increased incentives for transparency, integrity, and corporate social responsibility at the moment. So it's a huge question, sorry for that.
Well, it really is a huge question. And let's say, knowing the quality of TI Brazil, I would not expect an easier question, of course, because I know that really doing a great job. But you know, there are two sorts of corruption which can happen when we speak about economic packages. The first one is at the stage of the legislating, which means in the stage when adopting the necessary laws and other rules for stimulating the economy. And the second one is the application of those rules. It is, of course, the lobbyists, the registered, non-registered ones, the guys who don't even call themselves lobbyists, used everything what they had at their disposal to influence the governments to adjust the legislation or their application to their needs. So this will be, I think, the homework for all of us in the future, to analyze how solutions have been developed, why, let's say, the packages were delivered or were adopted in the form as they were adopted. And of course, it will be a little bit easier task to monitor how then the legislation has been implemented. The problem is that everything went so fast and is still going so fast in the, let's say, bringing those economic packages, that if the countries were, let's say, avoiding any transparency or any, let's say, control mechanisms, then everything will have to be done afterwards. Sometimes even when the money will be spent already. It would be, I don't think that any country in the world has introduced any additional safeguards in those processes, and that the level of the problems which we might expect from different countries is simply equals the level of the, let's say, democracy and the rule of law in those countries. We will really have to work hard, and when I say we, I'm saying the international community together with national, let's say, governmental, but also non-governmental organizations, to find ways to identify the loopholes, the problems, possible corruption, and then to find ways how to fight it. This will not be an easy task. It will not be a short one. It will take some time and a lot of efforts. International financial organizations and international investors are in much better position here, especially the FIOs, because what is growing right now in the world is that international financial organizations do know that they have to apply strict conditionality for the use of their money. So if the individual governments will not follow the rules which are set by the FIOs, then they will simply lose the money. We saw quite an unsuccessful attempt in the European Union this week or last week, when they tried to connect the respect of the rule of law to the use of economic stimulus to different countries. It has not passed in the way as it was foreseen. We will see what will happen. But other international financial organizations such as the World Bank or IMF have very clear, very straightforward rules, and I'm sure they will do their part of the fight against corruption here. I can also try to respond to the second question on the private sector, unless Jim and Sandrine would like to jump in.
I'll jump in after.
Okay. So what we saw in the, let's say, this year in the time of pandemic is that some governments have really increased their cooperation with the private sector. Now, the usual or the standard relation between attitude of the governments toward their private companies is normally, no, you are the bad guys, we are the good ones. Here, in the case of pandemic, we saw many governments and companies working together, sometimes based on the rule of, let's say, based on the force of the law, such as in the United States, when the president can decide what the companies will produce, sometimes completely voluntarily, because governments did understand that companies in specific areas of production, of course, can help them a lot. So we saw really good forms of cooperation between the governments and companies in some countries. Not so much in the area of transparency, integrity, but in the area of, let's say, production of equipment needed. I'm afraid that, let's say that there will be no companies will push particularly hard for increased transparency, integrity, and corporate social responsibility in this time, because many companies in the world are basically interested in surviving. So they will not care so much about how they will survive. And this is another big problem for the future. But what happened is a really nice proof that if the governments want, they can work very nice together with the companies. But of course, not particularly in the area of transparency, integrity, and CSR. And Jim, it's time for you now to jump in.
I won't jump. I think you said it. I was going to say make some of those points, so I'll leave it at that.
Jim, let's continue then with the next question. We have here with us Sumana Masood. Sumana, do you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Great, welcome.
I wanted to ask a question about some countries like Bangladesh. We were basically dealing with endemic corruption before the pandemic hit the country, like COVID-19. And we were living in controlled access to information, patronized judiciary, and also restrictive space for civil society to operate. So in that case, my question is to panelists, like whether international communities or multinational organizations like the UN or international communities could play proactive role in preventing the corruption issues, especially in the health sector. Thank you.
Well, Jim, knowing your special relation to the UN, I think this is the very good question for you.
Okay. Unfortunately, I think what we touched on just a few minutes ago is the idea is many countries are reliant on international assistance for the provision of a lot of government functions. I'm sure that that Bangladesh has a strong donor community. One of the suggestions, one of the ideas in the article, which we touched on, is twofold. There are two ideas actually. One is the introduction of experts outside of government to oversee the distribution of support in the public health side of the pandemic. That you have non-governmental experts or activists who have some sort of oversight role, with teeth. That is one avenue. The other, which is a bit harder, especially for UN agencies, but as Drago has mentioned, not as much for the IFIs, international financial institutions, organizations, is conditionality. If governments who are to some extent dependent on the international community for resources, reject or dismiss the role of civil society or the role of oversight, even of donor experts in observing how aid is used in a pandemic, in particular when there's urgency and controls are relaxed. Conditionality is going to play a very important role in trying to steer the ship in the right direction. So in that respect, let me add a point that Sandrine made before. The media and social media in particular play a very important role in bringing information to light in real time. This is the time when that must be promoted. And if for whatever reason that is hindered at the local level, that information through social media must get out internationally. It must generate a certain amount of momentum in the fight against corruption from outside, if that's not happening on the inside. So there are at least three avenues that may increase pressure against maladaptive behavior, against malfeasance.
Thank you very much, Jim. Sandrine, do you want to add something?
Yes, just add something, because I think it's very important. Now we have to think about something, the government, but not only the government. For example, UNDP or OECD or France or Europe or everywhere now, we have to, they cannot do without civil society and media. Even if they don't want to change, they will change, you know, because the civil society is more and more strong than government. And because the media help the civil society, we need to fight, even if it's sometimes when I talk with people, they said, okay, but, and especially the young people, and I want to send a message for everybody, step by step, and you need to be patient, because the only tools to fight against corruption is also its rules and transparency and so on, but it's to be patient and to work with civil society, to work with media, and try to change little bit and step by step. So now the government cannot say that. They need to change. And if they don't want to change, the media and the civil society will change it. Even, and unfortunately, they will kill some people. I know that it's very strong and it's hard, but this is the only way to change something. And you need really to be patient. Fight corruption, it's not easy. So it will take time, but we will arrive to do that, I'm sure.
Thank you, Sandrine. We have time for 2 questions more. So let's start with Roger. Roger, are you here? The floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you, Petra. So I'm from South Africa, and South Africa is caught up in a wave of corruption even before COVID-19. And our president, the current president, came into power promising to fix up the problem. However, it hasn't really been fixed. In fact, I think COVID-19 and the issues around that is now seen that corruption has become more of a problem, where even the spokesperson for the president has been caught up in a scandal with her husband for a huge amount of money being spent on corrupt purchase of PPE. So today we heard as well that the IMF has granted a loan, about $70 billion, I would think, to South Africa. And I was worried, just concerned that, or kind of understand whether the IMF and the World Bank has got any kind of programs where they will ensure that the money is well spent for the purpose that it was loaned to a particular country, and how they would go about, if they do, to ensure that that it's not being used for corrupt activities. I'll leave it there.
Guys, would you mind if I respond to this one, because I have a particular special interest in South Africa, and I will explain why. IMF can be a very strong player against corruption in any country. I've been working in many countries, let's say Afghanistan, Ukraine, Kosovo, name it. And for me, the most effective organization, international financial organization, was always the IMF, because due to its strong conditionality. And I'm sure they will apply the strong conditionality in the case of South Africa too. And why I said I have a special interest in South Africa is, one of my heads is, I'm chairing the OECD working group on bribery, and South Africa is one of our members. And following the election of the new president, I see some signs. Well, I've been contacted by some people from South Africa, basically saying that the new president is really interested in fighting corruption. You got a new head of the prosecution service and so on. So I would have a question here for you. Is this just the impression that somebody would like to give, or this is really happening in Africa? Is the situation improving or not?
So just to answer that, the situation seems like it's not being improved. We hear about corrupt activities going on. In fact, one of the huge problems we have, is during this COVID period. I'm not a smoker, but cigarettes have been banned for sale. but there's an issue where the one of the ministers who's responsible for running the COVID lockdown program has been involved in a scandal where she has been involved with illegal cigarette manufacturers, and therefore the cigarette, the legal sale of cigarettes is banned, but smokers have got their daily, they're getting their cigarettes. So the illegal sale of cigarettes has just escalated. Now that is one of the things, and it's obviously a minister in the president's office. And so to the general public, I know a little bit more, but general public, it doesn't seem like there's any slackening of corruption. Yes, we have put in certain, we've put in a new head of the National Prosecuting Authority. So there's certain changes that are happening there, but there isn't enough to stem the tide of corruption that we've got in this country, considering that the economy of the country was in a bad shape even before COVID. So to get back to your point, Dragos, it is really for the ordinary man in the street, he doesn't see that as a problem. He doesn't see that there's any hope, in fact, of this wave of corruption being eradicated within the next few years, because it's just so endemic. I said in my LinkedIn profile that it seems corruption is the norm in South Africa rather than the exception. And we seem to be fighting a war that we can't be winning. So I'd like to connect with you, once this session is over, and to see, what can we do from inside the country as well, and just to connect in general. But let me leave it there.
No, I just wanted to ask you the same thing. So I hope you don't mind if we continue bilaterally afterwards, after the session, today or tomorrow, because really we have to do something.
Fantastic. Look forward to that.
Likewise.
Okay, we have one more question. Rohit is with us. Rohit from Nepal, do you hear me?
Yes, Petra, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Yes, I just wanted to raise a question to the panelists that, you see, the rules and regulation of the procurement is cumbersome in our country and it is not updated. And for example, you see, if we want to go in the emergency, we have to take permission from the higher authority. And higher authority don't give permission, but we want to work genuinely. The higher authority want to give the permission to those who are connected with them, but we are not connected with them. In such situation, those persons who don't have connection with the higher authority and want to work in integrity, is there any way to recognize the integrity of those persons who want to work in the integrity, or purely this serving intention?
Well, let me take a stab at that. I think are you asking about shining a light on parts of government that are not functioning, or parts of government that are functioning?
Actually, government is not encouraging to the entity or the persons who want to work in integrity. Without corruption, they don't want to work with the person or the entity who want to work without corruption.
Sorry if I just would like to be sure that I understand your question. Rohit, I would like to know if you take the example if one person want to work with integrity. That's it.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes.
And for example, they want to work with integrity in the government, and the government doesn't want. I'm not sure
Yeah.
that
Yes, yes.
okay. So, and what is your question exactly? If we have some rules or some protection for this person, I would like to be sure that we can try to reply to your question. For example, in France or in Europe, okay, if the person wants to work with integrity, it's you know, it's the rules. It's not the exception. This is a rule. So we have some protection, like with Loi Sapin for whistleblowing, and I think James can take about whistleblowing more than me. But of course, we have some protection for the person because this is the rules. It's not the exception. But for example, if you work in, I don't want to, but I will take the example of Africa and Ivory Coast because I worked a lot in Ivory Coast, so I know the rules. For example, if you work in some I don't know, some kind of it's not like a government, but some public sector, in the public sector in Ivory Coast, sometimes you can find, because this is not, this is a systemic corruption, you know, it's, the corruption is systemic, so it's cultural. You can find some petty corruption. And maybe you will not have a really good protection, okay? So if you don't have the really good protection because you are afraid for your own integrity, but on the other hand, you want to work with integrity. This is very, very complicated situation. And to be honest, I cannot give you the real answer except to be brave. But brave is not enough, you know. Some I cannot say in the, for example, in Africa or Middle East or even in Europe, you have the rules in the protection, but sometimes you can be confronted to this kind of issue. And unfortunately, for the moment, except to be brave and to talk with, for example, to talk with authority and to be sure that the authority are not corrupted, you can work with integrity. But I know that it's very difficult because, you know, James, you can say, except to be brave. And I think this is the only way. But I know that it's difficult because you are afraid for your family and so on. This is a real life, you know, it's not just like a very beautiful rules. This is a real life. And I know that it's difficult, but you have to try to do your best and to try to don't be corrupted, you know. But I know that I don't have the answer, to be honest, because in the real life, sometimes you can be in this situation. And even if you have the good rules, you cannot feel protected by the rules, because that's why I told you to be patient, because only the education and the example of a person like you will change the world regarding corruption and regarding the way of thinking of the people, you know. And maybe try to talk about the impact of economy. The economic impact of corruption is huge. And Africa, for example, and India, you can talk with, you can talk about this impact. And if you say, because they will say, we want to have money, we want to win money. And that's why we are corrupted, because we want money, but this is not the good answer. If you want money, you have to stop the corruption. You know, this is the only point. So sorry, but the only answer is sometimes you have to be brave and don't be afraid. But James, if you have another key in the real life, or Drago.
Let me ask, Rohit, are you talking about a personal situation where there's an individual, perhaps yourself, who's an island of integrity and a sea of corruption? Are you there?
Rohit? Rohit, please unmute yourself.
Yes.
I don't. Okay, he's here.
Yes. I can
Rohit,
hear.
did you hear the question from James?
No, could you please repeat once more? I didn't hear.
Are you talking about an individual who is an island of integrity in a sea of corruption in a government bureaucracy? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, individual entities, many entities, they want to work in integrity, not only one, or there are several entities that want to work in integrity, but they are not getting opportunity, or they are not getting protection from the higher authority. That is my question.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I mean, the benefit of having a multiplicity of players, in other words, more than one outlying person, if there are a group of you is to mobilize and coalesce and to raise hell. This is an area, and I'm not sure of how permissive the environment is in Nepal for this in general, or specifically in the time of COVID. I'm not that familiar with it. But the most effective way to counter this kind of thing is mobilization, civic engagement, and protest, public as possible. Because if you play by their rules, you will lose. I learned that in my drama fighting corruption inside the UN. If you play by their rules, you will lose. So you have to change the rules with a coalition and to mobilize as much as possible and to be public. Being public is, by that, I mean media, I mean international community, I mean social media, pointing out these events as and when they occur. Otherwise, I would rely on Sandrine's answer. You just have to be brave. And that's a very, very lonely way of operating.
Thank you, James. We still have one more question. This is our last question for today. Marian, you are now, it's your turn, your floor. Please unmute yourself. Okay.
Okay. Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for this great webinar. I'm so happy to see you again. I didn't come to IACA like for 3 years ago, and I'm a Professor Drago, so I'm happy to see you again. And my question is, I am working in Egypt, and I can see that there is a real political will to fight corruption in Egypt. And the procurement is one of the sectors that are really affected by corruption, like in many parts of the world. It's not only in Egypt. But I can see that first there is a political will to fight corruption in this sector and generally. The second thing is that we have now a new law that really aims to fight corruption. It introduced new concepts like governance, like integrity, and new concepts we didn't have in the previous law. And we also now have the e-procurement system. However, the law is not enough. We know that we can have those, but not enough. My question is how to have a better oversight program. It's not only one thing to do, to really implement the law or to ensure the enforcement of the law.
Well, nice to see you again, Mariam. And I have to say, let's say, it is good to hear that there's a country where there is political will to fight corruption. And what you just described is really an important step. You know, countries which are really trying to fight corruption in the area of public procurement, they reach out to e-procurement systems. And you're also absolutely right by saying that just the law itself is not enough. Somebody has to control the implementation of the law. So in cases like that I would say that hopefully there are not too many exceptions in your law, which would not be mandatory part of the e-procurement. So if e-procurement is covering, let's say, major part of public procurement in Egypt, this is already a good sign. And then you would need, let's say, a body which would be authorized to monitor the irregularities in the procurement process. Sometimes those are special bodies who are, let's say, revising the procurement processes. Sometimes those are the courts of audits. But in the case of e-procurement systems, and I saw this, let's say, in Ukraine, since everything is published, the civil society is extremely strong in monitoring what is going on through e-procurement system, because it is available to everybody. And civil society in Ukraine is really a very strong and important player in the fight against corruption in public procurement sector. E-procurement changes everything. You just have to have somebody who will be monitoring it.
Yeah, but if the civil society in Egypt, there is a problem of trust, and we know this, there is a problem of trust between the government and the civil society, and I can say that it goes both ways. Both of them have to rebuild the trust. But if this is not available, I mean, the civil society, can the media do this role?
Well, yes, of course. And say, partly I also count media as part of civil society. But you know, if there's the lack of trust, both sides will have to sit down and discuss it.
Yeah, so this is what they're trying to do now.
First off, if this problem is solved, and maybe it's better to start with the issue of trust and then start monitoring, because this can only help. If the level of trust will increase, then things will go much better. And if the government will understand that the civil society is not there to criticize them uncritically, but to really to assist them, and if the civil society will understand that it is not their role just to organize press conferences and engage in some sort of advocacy, but also to assist the government, then I'm sure that you will soon find the common language.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy also that you see that it goes both ways. So it's not only the government that has to work on like building the trust and to know that it's not their role only to criticize, but also, you know, like I think that the civil society also has to support the government when they have good programs and to criticize when they don't have like good ones. But the role is not always to criticize, because most of the people like see that the role of the civil society is only to criticize.
No, I saw so many NGOs in so many countries which simply got carried away, you know, and they really thought that their role is to criticize only, to call press conferences, engage in advocacy, not offering any, let's say, useful ideas or solutions. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for your answer, and thanks for this great webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We came to an end slowly. Drago, Jim, do you want to add anything? Sandrine, I believe Sandrine has some technical problems. She's not currently with us. We don't have any more questions. We came to an end of the session today. And Drago, do you want to say anything still?
Well, I would just like to thank all participants who actively engaged in the discussion today. And I really hope we were useful to a certain extent. And I do apologize for, let's say, for the technical problems we had, because, you know, there was a power shortage in southern France. And maybe just an idea to be thrown in. You know, today we discussed the potential corruption problems in providing the medical assistance to our citizens. Maybe in a year or two we should discuss the experience or corruption in the implementation of the economic stimulus packages. because for sure there will be plenty of things to discuss still. But of course, this is up to IACA and up to the interest of participants.
Thank you, Drago. For sure, we will organize, maybe not in 2 years, maybe already next year. Let's see. Jim, do you also have something?
I would support that because I think I don't want to be too grim about this. The situation is already grim enough. But I think we will have lots to examine in 3 and 6 and 9 and 12 months. I think the effects of this negatively, in other words, the promotion of corruption will be manifest imminently. So I think having another session, maybe even shorter or more focused on exactly that topic of the effects of these packages on corruption and what to do about it, would be useful even in the short term.
Thank you very much. So we came to an end of the session today. We went a bit longer than expected, but I hope you all enjoyed and this interesting discussion. As mentioned earlier, we have recorded the session. We will publish it next week on the IACA webpage. Also, I would like to invite you, we didn't mention this in the beginning of our session, please visit our webpage. We have published an article prepared by today's speakers on this topic, which you can find on the webpage under Resources, Opinions Board. So please use this opportunity. You can read the article, download it. And next week, of course, if you want to see the session again, we will also post the slides together with the recording. This is our last webinar for the July-August. We will continue again from September, from autumn. Please follow our webpage. Sandrine is here, I can see her. We again apologize for technical issues.
I'm so sorry. Really, I have a big problem with tree sound in the sound. So it's for James, it's a cyber attack in the hospital. No, but I'm not kidding. There are 3 cyber attacks in hospital in the same time. So all the Montpellier Nîmes are without internet. So I'm so sorry. Really, I'm the first disappointed for this problem, this issue. Really, I'm sorry.
No worries, Sandrine. We will for sure find an opportunity again in the following months. We will do another webinar. Okay. And this is something we cannot plan, we cannot foresee, and it's out of our power, so to say. And I hope all our participants who stayed with us until the end, they understand, and we are looking forward to the webinars, upcoming webinars. As I mentioned, we will again resume from September. So stay tuned, follow our webpage and social media, and I hope we see each other again soon. Thank you, Drago. Thank you, James, once again. Thank you, Sandrine. It was a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.